I never thought a fresh coat of paint would become evidence in a property dispute. But that's exactly what happened when Brenda Thornton decided to redecorate my survey markers with her favorite shade of forest green. My name is Brandon Walker, and I had been living peacefully in my Scottsdale, Arizona home for 3 years before the Sagebrush Hills Homeowners Association elected Brenda as their new president. The community was one of those sprawling suburban developments that popped up in the early 2000s, with identical stucco houses in various shades of beige and tan, red tile roofs that all looked the same from above, and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to the height of your grass. I should have known something was off when Brenda knocked on my door the first week of her presidency. It was a scorching Tuesday afternoon in June 2025, and I had just gotten home from my job as a software engineer at a tech startup downtown. I was still in my work clothes, tie loosened, when I heard the aggressive rapping on my front door. Opening it, I found a woman in her late 40s with an aggressively short haircut that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," and oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head like a headband. She wore a crisp white polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Brandon Walker," she asked, though she clearly already knew who I was. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Brenda Thornton, the new HOA president. I've been doing walkthroughs of the community, and I noticed your garbage bins are visible from the street. That's a violation of Section 4.7 of our CC&Rs. I blinked. "My bins are on the side of my house. You can barely see them unless you're specifically looking." Barely visible is still visible. The rules state all trash receptacles must be completely hidden from street view. I'm giving you a warning this time, but if it's not corrected within 72 hours, you'll receive a fine of $50 per day. Before I could respond, she had already turned on her heel and marched back to her golf cart, which she apparently used to patrol the neighborhood. I watched her drive away, feeling the first stirrings of annoyance that would eventually bloom into full-blown conflict. The garbage bin issue was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Brenda found reasons to cite me for violations I didn't even know existed. My garden hose was the wrong color and too visible from the street. The wreath on my front door was half an inch too large according to her measurements. My car was parked in my driveway for more than 24 consecutive hours, which apparently violated some obscure rule about creating a cluttered appearance. Each violation came with a sternly worded letter and the threat of escalating fines. I started attending HOA meetings just to defend myself, sitting in the community center alongside other frustrated homeowners while Brenda presided over the proceedings like a judge at a criminal trial. It was at one of these meetings in late July that I first heard Brenda mention something about property lines. She was discussing a beautification project she wanted to implement along the back fence line of certain properties, including mine. My house backed up to a natural desert area that the HOA maintained as common space, and Brenda wanted to install decorative fencing and landscaping. Some of these properties have unclear boundaries, she announced to the assembled homeowners. As part of this project, we'll be establishing clear demarcations so everyone knows exactly where their responsibility ends and HOA common area begins. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy, but at the time I had bigger concerns. I was dealing with a major project at work and didn't have the energy to fight about every little thing Brenda dreamed up. Then, in early August, things escalated dramatically. I came home from work on a Friday evening to find construction equipment in my backyard. Not my front yard, my actual backyard behind my house. A small excavator was digging up the desert landscaping near my back fence, and 2 workers were unloading materials from a truck parked in the alley that ran behind the houses. I immediately walked over to the workers, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" One of them, a middle-aged man with sun-weathered skin, looked up from his work. "HOA project, man. We're installing new fencing and a decorative wall." "On my property?" he shrugged. "We just go where they tell us. You'll have to talk to the HOA about it." I pulled out my phone and called Brenda's number, which I unfortunately had saved from all our previous interactions. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Brandon, I'm in the middle of dinner. There are workers digging up my backyard. What the hell is going on?" "Language, please. This is the beautification project I mentioned at the meeting. It's happening on HOA common area, not your property." "It's definitely my property. It's behind my house, inside my fence line." "The fence line is incorrect," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I had come to despise. "According to the HOA's records, you've been maintaining common area as if it were your own property. We're simply reclaiming what belongs to the community." "That's insane. This is definitely my property. I have the documentation from when I bought the house." "Well, the HOA has different documentation. The work will continue Monday morning. Have a nice weekend." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my backyard, watching the workers pack up their equipment for the day, and felt a cold rage settling in my chest. That weekend, I dug out all my closing documents from when I purchased the house. The property survey was there, showing clear boundaries. According to the official survey from 2022, my property extended all the way to the back fence and even a bit beyond it. The area where Brenda's workers had been digging was unquestionably mine. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and was waiting in my backyard when the construction crew arrived. I had printed out copies of my survey and was ready for a fight. "I'm sorry, but you can't work here," I told the foreman. "This is my property and I don't give you permission." He sighed, clearly not wanting to deal with this. "Look, buddy, we have a contract with the HOA. They're paying us. You need to work it out with them. I'm working it out right now by telling you that you're trespassing on my property. If you continue, I'll call the police." The foreman made a phone call, presumably to Brenda, and after a heated conversation, the crew packed up and left. I felt a small sense of victory, but I knew this was far from over. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It informed me that I was in violation of multiple regulations, that I was interfering with authorized HOA maintenance, and that I was being fined $500 per day until I allowed the work to proceed. Additionally, they claimed I had been illegally occupying HOA common area and demanded I remove all personal items and cease all maintenance on the disputed area within 7 days. I contacted a real estate attorney that same day. Her name was Patricia Gomez, and she had good reviews for dealing with HOA disputes. When I explained the situation in her office that Thursday, she listened carefully and took notes. "Do you have your original survey?" she asked. "Yes, from when I bought the house in 2022, and has the HOA provided any documentation for their claim?" "Just vague references to their records. Nothing specific." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Here's what I recommend. First, we need to get a new independent survey done. Not just a review of the old one, but a complete resurvey of your property. That way we have current indisputable evidence of the actual boundaries. Second, we send the HOA a cease and desist letter informing them that any work on your property without your permission constitutes trespassing and property damage. Third, we request copies of whatever documentation they're relying on for their boundary claims. How much is this going to cost me? The survey will run you about $1,500 to $2,000, depending on the complexity. My retainer is $3,000, but HOA disputes often end with the losing side paying attorney fees. If you're right about your boundaries, and I suspect you are, the HOA will likely end up covering your costs." I agreed to everything. Patricia drafted and sent the cease and desist letter that same day. I contacted a surveying company called Arizona Boundary Solutions, and they agreed to come out the following Tuesday to do a complete survey of my property. Brenda's response to the cease and desist letter was predictable. She sent me another certified letter claiming I was harassing the HOA, that my attorney's letter was hostile and uncalled for, and that the fines against me were now being doubled to $1,000 per day. She can claim anything she wants, Patricia told me when I forwarded her Brenda's response. She can't actually collect those fines without going through proper procedures, and no judge is going to uphold them when we prove the land is yours. The surveyor, a patient man in his 60s named Tom Reeves, arrived Tuesday morning with his equipment and a younger assistant. I showed him my original survey and explained the situation. "This happens more often than you'd think," Tom said, examining my documents. HOAs get aggressive about common areas, or neighbors build fences in the wrong spots and suddenly everyone's fighting about property lines. "How long will this take?" "Few hours to do the actual surveying. Then I'll need a couple days to prepare the official documentation and maps. I'll have everything to you by Friday." Tom and his assistant spent the morning setting up equipment, taking measurements, and marking points around my property. I noticed Brenda drive by in her golf cart several times, watching them with obvious displeasure. Around noon, Tom knocked on my back door with a concerned expression. "Brandon, you need to come see this." I followed him to the back corner of my yard, where the property line should have met the edge of the common area. Tom pointed to a small metal stake barely visible in the dirt. "This is one of your property pins. It marks the southeast corner of your lot, okay? Look at it closely." I crouched down and immediately saw what he meant. The metal pin, which should have been bright and visible, was covered with paint, forest green paint, the exact same color as the decorative fence posts the HOA had been planning to install. "Someone painted over it," I said, anger rising in my voice. "Not just this one. 3 of your 4 boundary pins have been painted over. Someone wanted to make them harder to find." Tom's expression was grim. "In 40 years of surveying, I've only seen this a handful of times. It's usually a sign that someone knows they're doing something wrong and is trying to hide the evidence." "Can you still determine the boundaries?" "Oh, absolutely. The pins are still there, and we have multiple ways to verify property lines beyond just the markers. But this is something you'll want to document. Take photos, and you should probably inform your attorney." I pulled out my phone and took pictures from multiple angles, making sure to capture the painted pins clearly. Then I called Patricia and explained what we had found. That's actually good news for us, Patricia said. It shows intent to deceive. When we go to court, and we probably will, this evidence will work heavily in your favor. It's one thing to have an honest dispute about boundaries. It's another thing entirely to deliberately tamper with survey markers. Can we prove it was Brenda? We can certainly establish who had motive and opportunity. If she's been pushing this boundary claim and suddenly your pins are painted the same color as her planned fence posts, that's not a coincidence. Tom and his assistant finished their work by mid-afternoon. Before leaving, Tom walked me around the property and showed me preliminary findings. Your original survey was accurate, he said. Your property line runs exactly where these documents say it does. But here's the interesting part. He led me to the back fence and pulled out a measuring tape. The fence that's currently here, it's actually about 3 feet inside your property line. You own even more land than you're currently using. So where does the HOA common area actually begin? See that line of creosote bushes back there? He pointed to a row of scraggly desert plants about 10 feet behind my current fence. That's roughly where your property ends and the common area begins. Whoever built this fence originally put it in the wrong place, probably to make it easier to install or to follow the natural contour of the land. But legally, you own all the way back to those bushes. I stared at the area in question. It wasn't huge, maybe 300 square feet of rocky desert, but it was definitely substantial. And if my property line was there, then Brenda's planned construction was even more egregiously on my land than I had thought. Now here's where it gets really interesting, Tom continued. He pulled out a tablet and showed me an aerial view of the neighborhood. See this house next to yours? That's 4782 Sagebrush Lane? Yeah, that's Brenda Thornton's house. I thought the name sounded familiar. Well, if your property line is here, he traced a line on the screen, then look at where her back fence and patio extension are. I looked closely at the image and felt my jaw drop. Brenda's property had an elaborate patio and pergola structure in her backyard. Based on where Tom was indicating the property line should be, a significant portion of her patio appeared to be on HOA common land. Is that on the common area? I asked. Tom nodded slowly. Unless I'm very mistaken, and I'm not, Mrs. Thornton's patio extends about 10 feet past her actual property line and onto HOA common area. That pergola? Completely on land she doesn't own, so she's been illegally using HOA property while trying to claim I'm doing the same thing? Seems that way. I'll have all this documented in my official report. After Tom left, I sat in my backyard and tried to process everything. Brenda had been harassing me for months about minor violations, real or imagined. She had tried to claim my property as HOA common area and attempted to start construction on it. She had apparently painted over my property pins to hide the evidence, and all the while, she had been illegally occupying HOA land herself with a structure that probably cost $30,000 or $40,000 to build. The hypocrisy was stunning, but more than that, I realized she had probably known about the property line issues all along. That's why she wanted to do her beatification project in the first place. If she could establish that the back area of my property was actually common area, it would set a precedent for her own illegal construction. She was trying to retroactively legitimize her patio by claiming all the back areas were common land. I called Patricia and explained Tom's findings about Brenda's patio. "Oh, this is beautiful," Patricia said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "She's not just wrong about your property. She's projecting her own violations onto you. We need to be strategic about how we use this information." "What do you mean?" "We could expose her immediately, but that might make her defensive and even more aggressive. Instead, let's wait for the official survey report. Then we'll present everything to the HOA board at once, both the proof that she's wrong about your property and the evidence of her own encroachment. If we do it right, this could result in her removal from the board entirely." "There's a board meeting next Wednesday," I said. "Think the report will be ready?" Tom said Friday. "That gives us 5 days to prepare. Perfect timing." That Friday, Tom's official survey report arrived via email and certified mail. It was a comprehensive document with maps, measurements, photographs, and detailed technical descriptions. Everything Tom had told me was confirmed in writing. My property line was exactly where my original survey said it was. The painted property pins were documented with photos and notes about the suspicious timing and color match. And Brenda's patio encroachment was laid out in precise detail, showing that she had built approximately 10 feet past her property line onto HOA common area. Patricia and I spent the weekend preparing our presentation for the board meeting. She advised me to stay calm, stick to facts, and let the evidence speak for itself. "Brenda is going to try to make this emotional," Patricia warned. "She'll probably attack your character, question your motives, maybe even try to claim you're the one who tampered with the survey pins. Don't take the bait. Just keep redirecting to the facts." Wednesday evening, I arrived at the community center 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The room was already half full, and I noticed several neighbors I recognized. Word had apparently spread that there was going to be drama. Brenda sat at the front table with the other 4 board members. When she saw me walk in with Patricia, her expression hardened. The meeting started with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, a financial report, discussion of upcoming maintenance projects. I waited patiently through 45 minutes of mundane HOA business until finally Brenda called for new business. Before we opened the floor, Brenda said, "I want to address an ongoing situation with one of our homeowners. Brandon Walker has been interfering with authorized HOA maintenance and making spurious legal threats. He's refused to allow necessary work to proceed on common area behind his property and has racked up significant fines for his obstructionist behavior." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I'd like to address those claims." Brenda's lips tightened.
You'll have a chance during homeowner comments.
"Actually," Patricia stood up, "my client has the right to respond immediately to accusations made against him in a public meeting. That's established case law in Arizona HOA proceedings." One of the other board members, an older man named Richard Castellano, nodded. "She's right, Brenda. If you're going to call him out by name, he gets to respond." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but she gestured curtly for me to proceed. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, carrying a folder with printed copies of the survey report. Patricia had advised me to bring enough for every board member and several extras. "Thank you," I said. "Mrs. Thornton claims that I've been interfering with work on HOA common area. That's not accurate. I've been preventing unauthorized construction on my private property. To prove this, I had an independent survey conducted by Arizona Boundary Solutions, a licensed and bonded surveying company." I began distributing copies of the report. Brenda tried to wave hers away, but Richard took one and immediately started flipping through it. "This survey clearly shows that my property line is exactly where my original 2022 survey indicated. The area where Mrs. Thornton attempted to start construction is unquestionably my private property, not HOA common area. Additionally, the survey revealed something disturbing. I pulled out my phone and displayed photos of the painted property pins on the large TV screen the HOA used for presentations. I had already coordinated with the AV setup before the meeting. These are my property boundary markers. As you can see, someone painted over them with forest green paint, the same color as the fence posts in Mrs. Thornton's proposed beautification project. This appears to be a deliberate attempt to conceal the property boundaries." The room erupted in murmuring. Several people pulled out their phones to take pictures of the screen. Brenda's face had gone pale, then red. "That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "I never touched those pins. This is clearly a fabrication." The surveyor documented the painted pins in his official report. Patricia said calmly, "That report is a legal document. Falsifying it would be a criminal offense. Tom Reeves has been a licensed surveyor in Arizona for 42 years with an impeccable record." Richard was reading through the survey report carefully. "Brenda, this looks pretty conclusive. The measurements all match up with Walker's original survey. Common area has always extended to the back fences," Brenda insisted. "That's how it's been since the development was built." "Actually, no," I said. "And that brings me to another finding in the survey report. Page 17. I watched as the board members flipped to that page. Richard's eyebrows shot up. Another board member, a woman named Susan Park, gasped audibly. "According to the survey," I continued, "Mrs. Thornton's own property has a significant encroachment onto actual HOA common land. Her patio and pergola structure extends approximately 10 feet past her property line. Unlike my situation, where I was simply maintaining land I legally own, Mrs. Thornton has built a permanent structure on land that belongs to the HOA." The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once. Brenda stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. "This is a setup," she shouted. "You're lying. That survey is fake." "Brenda, sit down," Richard said firmly. "Yelling isn't going to help. I will not sit down. This is my meeting, and I won't be slandered in my own community." Patricia stood up. "Mrs. Thornton, I strongly advise you to stop talking. Anything you say right now could be used as evidence in future proceedings." "Evidence? Are you threatening me?" "I'm advising you of your legal position. You've made false claims about my client's property, attempted to construct on his land without permission, and apparently built an unauthorized structure on HOA common area. Additionally, there's evidence suggesting you tampered with official survey markers, which is a criminal offense in Arizona under Statute 33-1818. The color drained from Brenda's face. She looked around the room as if searching for support, but the other board members were all reading the survey report with varying expressions of shock and concern. Richard cleared his throat. "I think we need to table the discussion about Mr. Walker's property and address these new allegations about Brenda's patio. This is serious." "There's nothing to address," Brenda said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "My patio is on my property. This is all lies designed to undermine my authority as HOA president. Susan Parks spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Brenda, I've been to your house for the board holiday party. That patio is huge. If even part of it is on common area, we have a major problem. We should get our own survey done, another board member suggested. An independent verification, that's a waste of HOA money, Brenda protested. You're going to trust this outsider over your own president? I'm not an outsider, I said evenly. I'm a homeowner in this community, same as you. And the difference between us is that I had a legitimate survey done by a licensed professional. You're just making claims without evidence. Richard was still reading the report. It says here that the surveyor found paint on Walker's property pins. Brenda, did you paint those markers? Of course not. Why would I do that? The paint matches the color specified in your beautification project proposal, Susan observed, looking at another document. That's quite a coincidence. I don't have to sit here and be accused of crimes, Brenda said. This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn the meeting unilaterally, Richard said. That requires a vote of the board. I'm the president, and we're the board. Brenda, I'm calling for a vote to suspend your authority as president pending an investigation into these allegations. All in favor? 3 hands went up immediately. Susan hesitated, then raised hers as well. Brenda stood alone. You can't do this to me, Brenda said, and I was startled to hear her voice crack. I've dedicated months to this community. I've been trying to improve things, to make this neighborhood better. By harassing homeowners and building on land you don't own? Richard shook his head. Brenda, you've overstepped. Badly. We'll need to bring in our own surveyor to verify these findings, and depending on what we discover, the HOA may need to take legal action to rectify the situation. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Brenda stormed out, her heels clicking furiously on the tile floor. Other homeowners crowded around me, some asking questions, others expressing support. Several people mentioned they had also been harassed by Brenda over trivial violations and were glad someone had finally stood up to her. Patricia and I left after about 30 minutes once things had calmed down somewhat. In the parking lot, she turned to me with a satisfied expression. That went better than I expected. The board turning on her was the best possible outcome. What happens now? The HOA will do their own survey, which will confirm everything we already know. They'll probably demand that Brenda remove her patio encroachment. As for the painted pins, that's trickier. It's technically a criminal matter, but proving she did it personally might be difficult. So she might get away with that part? Patricia shrugged. Possibly. But she's lost her position, her credibility, and she's going to have to spend a lot of money either removing her patio or negotiating with the HOA to lease that land.
That's not nothing.
I drove home feeling vindicated but exhausted. The stress of the past few months had taken a toll, and even though I had won this battle, I knew the war might not be over. I was right. 3 days later, I received a hand-delivered letter from Brenda's attorney. It was a rambling, aggressive document that accused me of defamation, harassment, and conspiracy to damage her reputation. It demanded I retract all my statements and pay her $50,000 in damages. Patricia laughed when I showed it to her. This is desperation. She has no case. We'll respond with a motion to dismiss and file a countersuit for her attempted theft of your property. The HOA's independent survey came back 2 weeks later and confirmed every detail of Tom's report. My property line was exactly where I said it was. Brenda's patio extended 10.3 feet onto HOA common land. The property pins had indeed been painted, though the new surveyor couldn't determine who had done it. At the next board meeting, now with Richard serving as interim president, the board voted to demand that Brenda remove the encroaching portion of her patio within 90 days or face daily fines and legal action. They also voted to dismiss all fines that had been levied against me and to reimburse me for my legal and surveying costs, which totaled just over $6,000. Brenda didn't take it well. She showed up at my house the day after that board meeting, pounding on my door at 8 in the morning. I made sure to record the encounter on my phone before opening the door. "You've ruined my life," she screamed before I could even say hello. "Do you understand that? You've destroyed everything I worked for. Brenda, you need to leave my property." "Your property? That's all you care about, isn't it? Your property, your rights, your boundaries. What about community? What about cooperation? You tried to build on my land without permission. You painted over my survey markers. You built your own patio on HOA land and then tried to deflect by attacking me. None of that is my fault. I was trying to make this community better. The back areas were messy, undefined. I was bringing order, structure, beautification. You were trying to legitimize your own violations by making everyone else's property boundaries fuzzy. I'm not stupid, Brenda. I know exactly what you were doing." She stared at me, tears streaming down her face. Her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "It's going to cost me $70,000 to fix my patio." $70,000. I don't have that kind of money. You should have thought about that before you built it on land you didn't own, or you could negotiate with the HOA to lease the land. That's not my problem. I'll sue you. I'll take everything you have. Your attorney already sent me a demand letter. My attorney is preparing a response. If you want to waste more money on a lawsuit you can't win, that's your choice. Brenda opened her mouth to say something else, then closed it. She turned and walked back to her golf cart, which she had parked in my driveway without permission. Before driving away, she looked back at me one more time. You haven't won, she said. This isn't over. But it was over, at least the main part of it. Brenda's threatened lawsuit never materialized. Her attorney apparently advised her that she had no case and would likely face sanctions for filing a frivolous suit. The HOA gave her 90 days to address the patio encroachment. She spent the first 60 days refusing to acknowledge the problem, insisting that the surveys were wrong and that she would find evidence to prove her property line was different. But no evidence existed because the surveys were correct. With 30 days left on her deadline, Brenda finally contacted the HOA to negotiate a lease for the common area her patio occupied. The board, still annoyed at her for the months of chaos she had caused, drove a hard bargain. They agreed to lease her the land for $500 per month with an annual escalation clause and a provision that the lease could be terminated with 6 months' notice. Brenda had no choice but to accept. The alternative was demolishing a significant portion of her expensive patio. As for the painted property pins, that issue took a more serious turn. I hadn't pushed for criminal charges initially because, as Patricia pointed out, it was difficult to prove definitively that Brenda had painted them. But then Tom, my surveyor, contacted me with additional information. I was reviewing my photos from your survey, Tom said when he called me in September, and I noticed something interesting. In one of the background shots, you can see a golf cart parked in the alley behind your house. It's partially visible behind some mesquite trees, okay? Well, I got curious, so I enhanced the image. The golf cart has HOA markings on it, and there's someone in it. A woman with short hair. The timestamp on the photo was from before we found the painted pins. You're saying you have a photo of Brenda near my property markers? Can't say definitively it's her from the image quality, but it's someone in an HOA golf cart in the exact area where the markers were tampered with. I thought you should know. I forwarded the information to Patricia, who forwarded it to the police. A detective named Maria Sanchez contacted me a week later and asked me to come to the station to give a statement. Detective Sanchez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who clearly didn't suffer fools. She took my statement, reviewed all the evidence, and then sat back in her chair. Here's the thing, she said. Tampering with survey markers is a crime. It's taken seriously because property boundaries are a fundamental part of real estate law. But it's hard to prosecute without direct evidence. Your surveyor's photo is interesting, but it's not conclusive. So there's nothing you can do? I didn't say that. What I can do is interview Mrs. Thornton and see how she responds. Sometimes people dig their own holes when they start talking. 2 weeks later, Detective Sanchez called me with an update. I interviewed Brenda Thornton yesterday. She denied painting the markers, of course. But she also claimed she had never been in the alley behind your house, which was a mistake. Why? Because we have that photograph showing an HOA golf cart back there. And we have testimony from neighbors who saw her driving around inspecting properties. When I pointed out the contradiction, she changed her story and said she might have been back there but didn't remember. Then she claimed that even if she was there, she didn't paint anything. So she's lying. She's definitely being deceptive. I pushed harder, and she eventually admitted she had been concerned about property boundaries and had gone to look at the markers. But she insisted she never painted them. Do you believe her? Detective Sanchez paused. Personally, no. But believing and proving are different things. However, she did make one very interesting statement. She said that the markers were hard to see because they were so old and weathered, and that maybe someone should paint them to make them more visible. She suggested painting markers to make them more visible? Exactly. Which is not how survey markers work. They're supposed to be left as is. Her comment shows knowledge about painting markers and a mindset that it might be acceptable. Combined with the circumstantial evidence, the paint color match, and her motive to obscure your property lines, I think we have enough for charges. 3 months later, in December 2025, Brenda Thornton was charged with criminal damage under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1602 and tampering with a survey monument under Arizona Revised Statute 33-1818. Both were misdemeanors, but they carried potential jail time and fines. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Brenda pled guilty to criminal damage and the tampering charge was dropped. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 100 hours of community service, ordered to pay restitution for my surveying costs, and required to attend anger management counseling. The HOA board voted to permanently ban her from serving in any leadership position and several homeowners she had previously harassed filed complaints with the board about her past conduct. The new president, Richard Castellano, instituted reforms to prevent future abuses of power, including clearer procedures for property disputes and limitations on fines that could be imposed without board approval. As for me, I finally had peace and quiet. My property was clearly marked with new unpainted survey pins. The HOA dropped all claims to the land behind my house. I even extended my fence back to the actual property line, giving myself an extra 300 square feet of usable space. Brenda put her house on the market in February 2026, unable to bear the shame and hostility she faced in the community. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she was moving to Tucson to be closer to her sister. I didn't feel particularly triumphant about it. She had brought everything on herself, but watching someone's life fall apart, even someone who had made my life miserable, wasn't satisfying in the way I thought it might be. The house sold in April and a young couple with 2 kids moved in. They were friendly and normal, without any apparent desire to patrol the neighborhood enforcing obscure regulations. I helped them move in a few heavy items and welcomed them to the community. "Is it a good neighborhood?" the husband asked me as we carried a dresser up their front steps. "It is now," I said. On a warm evening in May 2026, almost exactly a year after Brenda had first knocked on my door to complain about my garbage bins, I sat in my extended backyard with a beer and watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. My property was mine, clearly defined and legally protected. The HOA had new leadership that was reasonable and fair. Brenda was gone, living with the consequences of her choices. I thought about how quickly things can escalate when someone in a position of minor authority decides to abuse that power. How a homeowners association, which should exist to maintain community standards and property values, can become a tool of harassment in the wrong hands. How important it is to stand up for yourself even when it's expensive and stressful and easier to just give in. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Restitution check cleared. Your account should show the deposit in 24 hours. Glad we could get you through this mess." I texted back a thank you and took another sip of my beer. The whole ordeal had cost me thousands of dollars, countless hours of stress, and had tested my patience in ways I never expected. But I had won. Not just the legal battle, but the larger fight to establish that homeowners have rights that cannot be trampled by petty tyrants with clipboards. A year ago, I would have told you that HOAs were a minor annoyance, something you tolerate as part of living in a planned community. Now I knew better. An HOA could make your life hell if the wrong person got control. But they could also be reined in, reformed, and made to serve their proper purpose. The desert evening grew cooler and I went inside my house, my legally verified and properly surveyed house, feeling genuinely content for the first time in months. The property pins were clearly marked, the boundaries were established beyond any dispute, and my backyard was exactly the size it was supposed to be. Brenda Thornton had tried to redraw reality to suit her own agenda, painting over the truth in the same way she had painted over my property markers. But reality has a way of asserting itself, especially when you have good documentation, a thorough surveyor, and a competent attorney. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that documentation is everything in property disputes. I learned that standing up to bullies, even institutional ones, is worth the effort. I learned that small-scale tyrants often have the most to hide. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. The Sagebrush Hills community moved on without Brenda at the helm. The beautification project she had proposed was quietly shelved. The aggressive enforcement of minor violations ceased. The daily fines and threatening letters stopped arriving in my mailbox. Life returned to the peaceful suburban normalcy that should have been there all along. I stayed active in the HOA after everything settled, attending meetings regularly and even joining the architectural review committee. I figured if I had gone through all that trouble to protect my rights, I might as well help ensure the HOA functioned properly going forward. Under Richard's leadership, it did. Decisions were made transparently. Homeowners were treated fairly. Rules were enforced reasonably, with warnings before fines and common sense applied to edge cases. It was everything an HOA should be and everything Brenda's version had not been. The community thrived. Property values held steady. Neighbors were friendlier without the constant fear of citation hanging over their heads. Sometimes I would see the new owners of Brenda's old house working in their yard, their kids playing in the driveway, and I would think about how different things might have been. If Brenda had just been reasonable from the start, if she had approached me as a neighbor instead of a subject, if she had focused on genuine community improvement instead of petty power games. But she hadn't, and in the end her inability to accept that she was wrong had cost her everything. Her position, her reputation, her home, and her clean criminal record. All because she wanted to build a patio 10 feet too large and then tried to cover up her mistake by attacking me. The painted property pins had been the smoking gun, the evidence that turned a property dispute into a criminal case. That forest green paint, matching her proposed fence posts perfectly, had been her undoing. It was almost poetic in a way. She had tried to obscure the truth to hide the markers that defined reality, and in doing so had marked herself as guilty. I kept one of the painted pins after Tom had documented everything and the new markers were placed. It sat on my desk in my home office, a reminder of the whole saga. Sometimes when work was stressful or life felt overwhelming, I would look at that painted piece of metal and remember what I had been through. It reminded me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could stand up to intimidation and fight for what was right, that the system, for all its flaws, could still deliver justice if you were patient and thorough. As the first anniversary of Brenda's initial complaint about my garbage bins approached, the HOA held its annual summer barbecue. It was a community tradition that Brenda had actually canceled the previous year, claiming it was too much work and not in keeping with the neighborhood's upscale image. Richard had reinstated it, and the turnout was huge. I manned the grill for a while, flipping burgers and hot dogs while neighbors chatted, and kids ran around the community pool. Susan Park came over with her husband and thanked me again for exposing the problems with Brenda's leadership. "I feel terrible that I didn't see it sooner," Susan said. "She was so convincing, so confident. I just assumed she knew what she was doing." "That's how people like that operate," I said. "They use confidence as a substitute for competence." "Well, thank you for having the courage to fight back. A lot of us were unhappy, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her." I shrugged. I didn't really have a choice. She literally tried to build on my property. Other neighbors had similar stories. The man who lived 3 houses down had been cited for having a crack in his driveway that was supposedly unsightly. A woman across the street had been fined for planting flowers Brenda deemed inconsistent with the desert aesthetic. An older couple had been threatened with legal action because their adult son's car was parked in their driveway for a month while he was between apartments. All of these violations and fines had been quietly rescinded after Brenda's removal. Richard and the new board had gone through her records and found dozens of questionable citations, many of which seemed motivated by personal grudges or simply by her need to assert authority. "She was drunk on power," Richard told me later that evening as the barbecue was winding down. "I've seen it before in HOA boards. Someone gets elected, usually running unopposed because nobody else wants to do the work, and then they start thinking they're some kind of dictator. It's a problem across the country. What's the solution? Accountability, transparency, and homeowners who are willing to pay attention and speak up. You did all 3, and it made the difference." As I drove home that night, full of barbecue and feeling connected to my community in a way I hadn't before, I realized that the whole ordeal had actually improved my life in unexpected ways. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive and infuriating, but it had also forced me to engage with my neighbors, to understand my rights, to learn about property law and HOA governance. I had made friends through the process. Patricia, my attorney, occasionally invited me to her office events. Tom, the surveyor, and I grabbed lunch every few months to discuss property line issues in the news. Several neighbors who had supported me during the conflict had become genuine friends. Brenda's attempt to take my property had backfired in every possible way. She had lost her own property, her position, and her freedom, while I had gained a larger yard, a more engaged community, and knowledge I would carry for the rest of my life. The lessons extended beyond property law. I learned about the importance of documentation, keeping records, and building a paper trail. I learned that sometimes you have to spend money to protect your rights. I learned that most people are reasonable if you approach them with facts and calm persistence. And I learned that the legal system, while slow and imperfect, generally works if you understand how to use it. I also learned darker lessons. I learned that people in positions of authority, even trivial authority like an HOA presidency, can abuse that power in shocking ways. I learned that someone who presents themselves as a pillar of the community can be hiding serious ethical failures. I learned that confidence and competence are not the same thing, and that you should always verify claims rather than accepting them at face value. But mostly, I learned that standing up for yourself matters, that your home is your castle, and defending it is worth whatever it costs. That property rights exist for a reason, and those reasons become very clear when someone tries to take what's yours. The painted property pins had been Brenda's fatal mistake, the overreach that turned a borderline case into an obvious fraud. If she had just stuck to her claims about the property line being different, she might have gotten away with it longer. But by trying to hide the evidence, by painting over the markers that proved her wrong, she had crossed the line from aggressive HOA president to criminal. I often wondered what she was thinking when she did it. Did she really believe she could get away with it? Did she think nobody would notice, or that even if they did, nobody would care enough to fight back? Or was she so convinced of her own righteousness that she didn't even see it as wrong? I would never know. Brenda and I had no contact after she moved away, and I had no desire to reach out. She was part of my past, a problem solved, a chapter closed. My property markers remained unpainted, bright and visible exactly as they should be. My fence sat at the true property line, backed up by multiple surveys and legal documentation. My yard was my yard, clearly defined and legally protected. And Brenda Thornton was somewhere in Tucson paying $500 a month to lease land for a patio she should never have built in the first place. Justice, I had discovered, is sometimes slow and complicated and expensive, but it's also real, tangible, and worth fighting for. Every time I looked at my backyard, at those extra 300 square feet that were rightfully mine, I was reminded of that truth. The HOA Karren, who had tried to cover my property pins with paint, who had attempted to build 10 feet over the line, who had harassed me and threatened me and made my life miserable, had ultimately failed. The surveyor had proved she was wrong. The evidence had established the truth, and the system, for all its flaws, had worked. As I sat in my properly bounded backyard on that May evening in 2026, exactly 1 year after the whole mess had started, I raised my beer to absent enemies and hard-won victories. The desert sunset was beautiful, the air was cooling, and my property was exactly as large as it was supposed to be. Life was good. The pins were clean, the boundaries were clear, and Brenda Thornton was someone else's problem now.